Hello everyone and welcome back to another Schmeat video. Today I'm going to be talking about why the Charlotte Hornets should try to replicate what the Grizzlies are doing this year and what the Grizzlies have been doing for the last couple years. Drafting well, signing free agents, trading well. The Grizzlies have done it all as a rebuilding team, and why the Charlotte Hornets could do that this offseason. So let's get right into it. This is going to be a different type of video where I do have some bullet points to help me through to try to remember what the Grizzlies have done, because I'm not accustomed to the Grizzlies culture, what they've been building over the last couple of years, how they've been drafting this well, which is just unprecedented, drafting like so many people that are making an instant impact, drafting players in the second round, in the first round, drafting superstars, non-superstars, overlooked players, whatever it is. It all started at the draft for them. Why I think this is an important comparison for the Hornets because they're two small market teams. We're not going to get free agents like the Nets have, like the Lakers have. We're not even going to be like the 76ers because we're not going to tank that hard. You know what I mean? We can't replicate what the big market teams are doing, and we can't tank so hard as the 76ers do. They call themselves a process for a reason, because they tanked so hard that it took them 5 years to even get good. So I don't think they're a good team to compare. Like, for a Hornets fan, I don't look at the Nets and the Lakers and be like, okay, we're going to turn out like that team. Because we're not going to get an Anthony Davis trade. We're not going to get LeBron James signing in free agency. We're not going to get 3 superstars on our team. That's just not possible. What is possible, though, as a small market team, is to replicate what the Grizzlies did in the draft. If I look through their roster right now, these are all players that they've drafted. Ja Morant, Brandon Clark, Grayson Allen, Desmond Bane, Xavier Tillman, and Jaren Jackson Jr. And Dillon Brooks was traded to them on draft night, so if you want to count that as them drafting him, do that. So those are all players that they have drafted themselves. Most of these players are people you have never heard before. You have the superstar like Ja Morant. You have the above-average college prospect like Jaren Jackson Jr., but Dillon Brooks, 45th pick. Grayson Allen, a guy who in college he was known as being the tripping guy, who wouldn't really pan out in the NBA, as many would say. You have Desmond Bane, who is just seen as a good shooter, but he kind of fell in the draft. People weren't looking at him as a solid prospect. Xavier Tillman, I haven't heard about since this season. Brandon Clark, a player who was overlooked. They have a bunch of players who they just hit in the draft, and if the Hornets can replicate that, it came out today that we have the highest odds for the 11th pick or something like that. We could go up to 1. I think it's like a 2% chance, but the reality of it is we're probably going to stay at either the 10th or 11th pick. If we can hit on that pick, that would be amazing, because it's not every year we're going to get a top 3 pick like LaMelo Ball. It's not every year we're going to even get a top 10 pick, because I believe we're going to be on an upwards trajectory with our good young talent and our veterans like Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier. But regardless, we have to hit on this pick. And it doesn't even have to be a guy like Devin Booker, who has a 13th pick, or I think he was a 13th pick, is a superstar. It doesn't even have to be like Giannis, who was another 13th pick. It doesn't have to be like Michael Porter Jr., who fell in the draft because he was injured, had back problems, and now is a superstar. It can just be a solid player, and I'd be happy with that at the 11th pick. And I do think we should pick best fit available. We shouldn't pick a center at the 11th pick. It's not really a center-heavy draft, so I think we just pick a good piece. Like, you see Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane fell to the second round. All right, he was the last pick in the first round, whatever it was, in last year's draft, and he is a solid rotational player for them. And it's just amazing to see. So I think, first of all, we can replicate or try to compare ourselves to the Grizzlies because of their draft success. And if we can draft well and draft bench guys that can actually contribute, unlike the Martin twins, unlike Jalen McDaniels at times, unlike Devontae Graham has his moments where, why is he even on the floor? If we can draft well and get solid rotational guys that are young and that we can develop. Like, if you look at, who was the guy? Dillon Brooks. He wasn't insane his first or second year in the league, but now he is scoring 20-some points per game in the playoffs for them. Just beat the Utah Jazz. If we can get a guy that can just work hard for us throughout the years, develop him, I think that's amazing. And another thing that they did is not only in the draft, but they made trades. And I don't mean they made trades like an Anthony Davis trade, like a James Harden trade. They made just I would say, underwhelming trade, but for them, it turned out really well. They traded away Marc Gasol and got a whole bunch of pieces back, but the only piece that has really mattered for them this season is Jonas Valanciunas. And if we can make one of those I'm putting underwhelming in quotation marks because it is an actual good trade, but for the general media, I think it's pretty underwhelming as a trade in 2019. And it's now, like, Gasol is not on the Raptors anymore, and Jonas Valanciunas, that seems like a great trade for the Memphis Grizzlies. And if we can make one of these underwhelming trades, I think that's going to help us tremendously. And even if it's for Jonas Valanciunas, I'd be a big fan of that. If we get Rashard Holmes in free agency, we're going to talk about their free agent signings as well. But if we can just make one of these underwhelming, overlooked trades, I think that's insane for us. And if it turns out how the Memphis Grizzlies and Jonas Valanciunas turned out, I think, I just hit my camera. I think it'll turn out insane for us. And finally, a thing that we can replicate as a small market team, just like the Memphis Grizzlies are, is signing restricted free agents from teams that don't want to pay for their good young players. What I mean by this, Tyus Jones and Kyle Anderson were both on different teams before. Let's break it down. For Kyle Anderson, he was on the Spurs. He was looking okay. They called him slow-mo. He was a solid young player, but he wasn't worth what the San Antonio Spurs was willing to pay. I think he got a $20 million or $19 million per year deal, and the Spurs just couldn't match that. And as a result, to a small market team being able to overpay just a little bit for these not stars but good rotational players, the Grizzlies were able to get them. And for Kyle Anderson this season, he's been amazing, getting career highs in multiple statistical categories. And the same for Tyus Jones. For the Timberwolves, the Timberwolves are probably beating themselves in the foot for Tyus Jones. But he was always seen as a scrappy backup point guard that can be reliable. And going into his restricted free agency, the Minnesota Timberwolves just gave him up. They didn't match the offer from the Grizzlies, and now he's on the Grizzlies, and now he's playing solid minutes with the Grizzlies off the bench. And for the Hornets, we need to sign a couple of these restricted free agents. And I know whenever someone is going to sign with us, every Hornets fan is going to be like, we overpaid for them. They are just a solid rotational player. Why are we giving them $17 million a year? Because we're a small market team. And I feel like I have to say that to myself because at moments, even with the Gordon Hayward deal, I was like, why the fuck are we paying him $30 million a year? He is not consistent in staying on the floor. I mean, when he does play, he is consistent, but he's not consistent with not having injuries. We're overpaying him. And then I had to step back and be like, the Charlotte Hornets are a small market team. We have to overpay for any free agent that we get. And with Rashard Holmes, I think when we sign, I'm not saying when we sign him, but if we sign a free agent center, it's going to be for a lot of money. And a lot of Hornets fans are going to think it's an overpay, but that's just the reality of being a small market team. So if we can replicate what the Memphis Grizzlies are doing right now, it's unrealistic to think we're going to be the Nets, we're going to be the Lakers, we're going to be these big market, like the Knicks are another one of these teams where they've drafted well, but they also got Julius Randle in free agency before he was good because, it's the Knicks. They get more free agent signings because it's a great place to play. Like Madison Square Garden is just insane to play at. And we can't replicate these big market teams, and we can't be like the 76ers who tanked for 5 years just to be the number one seed in the East. But the Grizzlies we can replicate. Small market team, good drafting, making trades not for stars but for good rotational pieces, overpaying for their real players. We can replicate that, and if we can replicate what they're doing this season, just beating the Utah Jazz in Game 1, I think will be great for the future. If you want to make some comparisons even between the teams, Ja Morant is a great comparison to LaMelo Ball. Although they play different styles of basketball, they're both seen as stars in their own right. They're both young, both developing, great playmakers. I would say LaMelo's a better shooter than Ja Morant, but that's a comparison you can make between those two. I mean, the rotational guys, I would say Kyle Anderson and Miles Bridges is another comparison that I can see between these two teams. Although, again, they play really different styles of basketball, their impact to the teams, to their respective teams, are pretty similar. And I think we are pretty similar to the Grizzlies in that respect of our players are, if you look 2 years back on the Grizzlies and their roster, I think that's what our roster is right now. You had John Morant wasn't there 2 years ago. But if we sign a great, like a Jared Jackson type guy in the future, I think we're a solid playoff team. So, yeah, that's the video. I'll see you guys later.